and I will begin with the introduction. Good evening, dear friends and colleagues, to our CAWASA Wednesday webinars. I'm Ignatius Jean, the Executive Director at CAWASA. And this evening we have with us a special guest who has over 20 years experience in the water, environment, and wastewater sectors. At Isle, she is responsible for the Trial Reservoirs program, an international initiative that aims to accelerate the uptake and application of technologies to take the water industry and adjacent sectors towards net zero carbon and sustainability. The Trial Reservoirs provides independent validation and loan funding for technology trials that trigger full-scale commercial implementation. Prior to joining Isle, she held roles as a researcher and research manager. She has proven experience in research and development of new technologies. Her work at the academic-industrial interface has been recognized through 9 international awards, such as the Royal Academy of Engineers, Society of Chemical Industry, and Institute of Chemical Engineers. Her work has also involved academic, public, and private sector partners. She's a former director of the board of Rock Blue, a non-profit NGO that supports utilities in Africa with good governance and financial management. She was the 2014-2016 chair of the Board of Water Institute of Southern Africa, CAWASA, and remained a director of the company until 2019. She's a previous chair of the CAWASA Mining Water Division and was a fellow of the International Water Association, IWA, in 2012-2017. She's a member of the Royal Society, RSSAF, and the founding president of the IWA, WISA, Southern Africa Young Water Professionals, an organization which now numbers its members in the thousands. She's currently an editor for the journals NPI Clean Water, Nature Partner Journals, Water Science and Technology, that's IWA Publishing, and Environmental Technology Reviews. She is an honorary professor in the Center for Bioprocess Engineering Research in the Department of Chemical Engineering at the University of Cape Town, and the author of 150 published research outputs in total, including journal articles, 57 books, book chapters, conference presentations, proceedings, and research reports. This evening, Dr. Joe Burgess of Isle Water Network will present on the Trial Reservoir, a fascinating project funded by the Isle Utilities to provide money to try innovative decision in water utilities. Let's welcome Dr. Joe Burgess of Isle Water this evening. Welcome, Dr. Burgess.
Before she gets started, Ignatius, if I might just be allowed, I came across Joe on the Water Network webcasts that some of the best webinars that are done, in my opinion, anywhere in the world. They're done once a month, and Piers Clark has become a friend of mine who runs Isle Utilities. He's incredible. But I have been so impressed with Joe. And as you know, I'm not impressed by lots of people, but during COVID, Joe brought in the research every month, and I look forward to it so much because it cut through all the BS that was going around, clearly explained what was going on with COVID and all the latest things that were happening. It was just almost a lifeline for many of us. And so, Joe, you have my complete admiration, and I think it's going to be a very interesting presentation. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you, both of you, for the introduction and the warm welcome. It's an absolute honour to be here, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to get to know you a little bit and talk to you about the Trial Reservoirs. This is the best project I have ever been involved in, and it is incredibly dear to my heart. So any questions, anything after the session or later by email, I will be happy to have other calls or take questions by email or WhatsApp or whatever is easiest. So yes, thank you very much. My name is Jo Burgess. I work for the Isle Group Limited, and I'm based out of South Africa. But the programs that I run are global. So they're available to utilities in any country of the world, and you can be wanting to test a technology that comes from any country in the world as well. So I'll dive into the sort of whys and wherefores and hows over the next few minutes. Now I'm hoping my slide will move. Yes, huzzah. All right. So the first trial reservoir that we developed was the Climate Change Trial Reservoir. And this is the program that we launched first in November 2021. The reason we launched the Climate Change Trial Reservoir was that we had COP26, which took place in the UK, and then also in that same year, the 6th assessment report came out from the IPCC, and it clearly stated for the first time that the climate crisis was our fault, humanity's fault. It's unavoidable. Concrete action needed to be taken, and it needed to be lasting action, and it needed to start now. Then the resolution that came out of COP was very weak. The promises that were being promoted during the COP event were diluted down at the last minute to a resolution that really doesn't help us, those of us who live and work in low and middle income countries, especially where we suffer the worst of climate change and we don't have the ability to do as much about it as people do in the developed world. And we were at Isle, we were furious, actually. We were so angry. Like, clearly we need to do something, and then the resolution from governments and politicians just wasn't there. And consumed with the feeling that someone should do something, we decided that we're not nobody, we are someone, and we can do something. So this is the something that we decided to do. The Isle Group puts 25% of its profits year on year into the Trial Reservoir. So although we are in the private sector and the consulting part of Isle is for profit, the Trial Reservoirs run as a non-profit enterprise. So there's no business model that needs to show a return on any investment. We also saw that the water sector is responsible for a large amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Drinking water treatment and distribution alone, which is a smaller component than wastewater treatment, is responsible for 204 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents emissions per annum. So we are major contributors in our industry of greenhouse gas emissions, which means we have the ability to lower that much greenhouse gas emissions. So we have huge potential in our industry to produce a positive impact. There are lots of water utilities and other industries around the world that are keen to achieve net zero carbon in the next few years, but it's difficult to do, and we can't do it by undertaking the same treatment and distribution and collection systems that we always have. We then got together a group of sponsors. So the people or the organisations whose logos you can see on the screen pool their money with ours. So they are donors into the Trial Reservoir programme. Now, as I said, there's no return on investment. So even the companies that you might or might not recognise, Pure Terra Ventures or Inheritance Enterprises, those are investment holdings companies. But when they put their money in the reservoir, it's a donation. So as soon as the money's in the pot, it's our money and we can do what we want with it. These people contribute to the pool of funding, but they have no influence over which technologies receive funding or which utilities get to take part in trials. So it's a completely neutral forum. The reason it exists is to make funding available through loan agreements, and I'll explain how those loan agreements work in a few slides' time. But our purpose is to enable water utilities and other tech users in industry, for example, to adopt technology and minimize the financial risk of doing so. So where we have enormous potential in the water sector to lower greenhouse gas emissions, it's really difficult to take up innovations especially in a utility. We're so tightly regulated, it's very difficult to take a risk. And what we're trying to do is minimize the risk. That's because the technologies to lower greenhouse gas emissions, some of them need to be invented, but there are hundreds of them out there, really great new technologies, but it's difficult to take them up and adopt them. What we do is bring in the expertise from the consulting part of Isle, the for-profit part of the business, where we undertake trial design, trial validation, and technology assessments all the time. We've done it thousands of times. We've assessed 13,000 technologies in the normal part of Isle, and I bring that expertise into the Trial Reservoir part to drive this program. So we can make sure that best practice is adopted during trial design and pilot programs. We make sure that there are robust practical solutions. We won't recommend technologies which are not unique or are not robust. We help to address the internal barriers within the utility. And these are the kind of things that mean that we often find we trial something and it seems good, but then we can't take it up because of a number of different reasons, some of which are really good reasons. And then once a trial is finished, if it's a success, then we celebrate that across the water community using the Water Action Platform, which is the forum that Valerie was describing a few minutes ago. And the purpose of this is to alleviate the climate crisis. We're going to support the path of water utilities towards net zero carbon. The reasons why it's difficult to innovate in the water industry are many and varied, but I've put 5 of the most common ones on this slide. So there are technical reasons, and sometimes you find that technology developers or innovators come to you, they come to the utility and they're trying to sell you what they've developed, but they're not really interested or they haven't really paid attention to what problems you're actually trying to solve. They've invented something and they want everyone to use it, so they're not really answering a challenge or solving a problem that you have. The way we overcome that is we have a very rigorous selection process. So if the technology doesn't actually do anything to solve the problem that you face, then we don't accept it into the Trial Reservoir pipeline. The second reason is often that technology developers are really good at explaining how their technology works, but they're not very good at explaining the business case or what the return on investment or what the payback period is going to be for the user, for the utility that wants to try it. So the way that we help is to support them in developing out their business cases, which again is something we do in the consulting part of Isle, and I've brought that across into the Trial Reservoir on a non-profit basis. And we make sure that the technology developer can actually explain what the economic benefits are, as well as the technical benefits of their technology when they speak to their potential customers. The third thing often is that there's a difficulty getting executive agreement or sponsorship within the end user organization, especially in the bigger utilities where there are hundreds or thousands of people. Those kinds of places often have an innovation division, and the very name of it is problematic. It's a division, it's divided, it's away from core business, and the people in innovation are often very curious people, but they're not involved in operational tasks on a day-to-day basis. And what they recommend or what they try to get people to use in daily operations might not be necessarily what's needed. So what we try and do is speak to everybody who needs to be involved in the utility side of things, from executive engagement to commercial directors to legal people to procurement to operational staff, to make sure that the technology does what the operations need it to do, that it can be procured, that it meets any legal or compliance requirements, and that there's support from above. So if budgets need to be released later down the line to actually procure the technology, then budgets will be made available by the senior management. The fourth thing is that it's really difficult to plan innovation. A lot of places try to use traditional project management methodologies, and they don't work very well because the nature of innovation is that we don't know 100% what's going to happen. We can be reasonably sure, but we have to build in some elasticity around the time it takes, usually, or sometimes the budget that's required. We have a tried and tested practice. We have a process for developing out trials for innovative technologies that don't rely wholly on sort of standard project management. So we've got a good process already in place for adopting and then integrating technologies into business as usual if the trial is a success. And then the last thing, which also relates to executive sponsorship, is the organizational immune system. If somebody just knocks on your door, you've never met them before, they go, you know, this is the phone for you. You must buy this phone. You're going to look at it and go, well, I'm not familiar with this. How would I know anything about it? How do I know if it serves my needs? I'm perfectly happy with the phone I've got. You know, you're trying to get my money and waste my time. Go away. And we overcome that to a large extent by having a good, I don't want to use the word stakeholder, but a good consultation process within the organization to be sure that the technology actually is suited to the user's needs and it is actually what you're looking for before we even get to the point where the technology is trying to perhaps sell itself. And this diagram shows you how it works. I know it's a really busy slide, and some people are probably dialed in on their phones and it's difficult to see. So the slides will be available afterwards. And what I'm going to do is walk you through the process of how it all works. So step one, where my red dot is, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, is to identify a solution. And this is where you've come across a technology and you're thinking, you know what, this might solve a problem that we face. This might be useful. The other thing you can do is if you have a problem and you're not sure what solution or what technology would solve it, get in touch with me and just explain what your challenge is or what your problem statement is. And I will look in our backend database and see if we can't make some suggestions of things for you to look at. You don't have to have contact with the salespeople from the tech companies themselves unless you want to. So we can give you an impartial view on what the technology does and how well it does it before you take any more steps. Once you have identified a solution that you want to try, the second step is that I will engage with them and we will get them to sign an engagement letter. And this is a document that they sign with us. So there's nothing for you to sign at this point. And what that letter does really is it's a statement of intent. So it says how long they think they're going to run a trial for you, if they're going to borrow some money from the reservoir, how much they want to borrow, how long they want to keep it for, and what the intent or what the aim of the trial is. So what they want to demonstrate, what they need to prove to you to show that their technology is what you need it to do, does what you need it to do. The next step is for us to support the trial design process. So I will bring people from Isle in, and my program pays Isle internal rates for their time so that they can dedicate proper attention to it. It's not that they're trying to do it on top of their day job. It's part of the consultant's day job to support the trial design. So I'll find somebody in the right time zone who has expertise in the right discipline. If it's a biological treatment process, I will find a process biologist. If it's a membrane process, then I'll find a membrane engineer. I will have somebody from the big Isle team who understands the technology and can design the trial robustly. That person will help you and your technology company develop out what the critical success factors are for your pilot or for your trial, and what the KPIs or the key performance indicators are. And that means that before the trial begins, we have a very clear set of questions that are the pieces of information that you need to decide at the end of the trial whether or not it does what you want. So we can look at things like the cost of operation or the treated water quality or the ease of operation or the performance. And we will translate those needs into a numerical target. So it becomes very straightforward at the end of the trial to go, yes, it met these targets, or no, it didn't. And there, it's not open to interpretation. You won't be in a situation at the end of the trial that you're not sure whether the tech does what you need still, but the tech developer is still trying to sell it to you. It will be an absolutely unambiguous decision by the time we get to the end of the trial. Once we've worked all that out, there are two formal agreements that get put into place. The first is a memorandum of agreement, and that's again between Isle and the technology developer. And it's basically a loan agreement. It says how much they'll borrow, what our cost recovery is, how much they will pay back if the trial is a success, and what they will be testing. Attached to that memorandum of agreement is their agreement with you. And this is, we call it a trial and purchase agreement. You can also call it a conditional purchase agreement. It's up to you what you call it. We can help create this document, but we don't have a template because we don't prescribe to you what it must look like. It's your commercial agreement between you and your technology supplier. So it's formulated in a way that adheres to your policies, satisfies your compliance requirements, and is appropriate for the technology and for the vendor as well. So it might be, let's say it's software that you subscribe to, then it would be a subscription agreement. It might be a turnkey project with assets, and then it would be a handover agreement or an asset transfer agreement. The nature of that trial and purchase agreement depends on the precise trial. Once those two things have been signed, though, we will release funds from the trial reservoir. So the reservoir it's figurative, it's a pool of money. And like a water reservoir, money flows out and it flows back in and it flows out again. So we transfer money across to the technology vendor. So they take a loan from us. This pays for the trial and it enables them to provide you the trial for free. So although the money doesn't go direct to the utility, the benefits of having a trial accrue to the utility. At step 7, while the trial's in progress, that appropriate expert that was brought in at the trial design stage, number 3, stays in contact with the end user a couple of times a month and the tech developer also a couple of times a month, and separately. So if you feel that the tech developer isn't really doing what they said they would, you can tell your trial manager about it and they will address the issue with the technology developer. If it runs into technical problems, then that person has the right technical expertise to get over the obstacle that the trial faces. And most of our trials hit some sort of glitch. Things don't go to plan almost ever. So that person is there to support the trial and to help it reach conclusion. At the end of the trial period, which can be as short or as long as it needs to be, depending on what the technology is, that trial manager will review the report from the technology developer. So normally when you do a pilot, the tech vendor writes a report and they give it to you. And usually it says that my technology is wonderful and you absolutely have to buy it. We will review that report. And if they don't have evidence, if the data don't exist to support the conclusions that they've drawn, we will make them clarify with evidence, or we make them moderate that conclusion. And then we check the results against the KPIs that we set up at the beginning. So if the technology didn't meet its KPIs, then obviously you don't have to procure anything. You don't have to subscribe to buy. You're not going to use it because it didn't do what you needed it to do. Also, we write off the loan. So the technology vendor is not out of pocket. They don't owe us any repayment at all. However, if the trial did meet the KPIs that you asked it to meet at the beginning, so it does everything you need it to do and it's clear and the evidence is there, then you will go ahead with whatever commitment you put into your trial and purchase agreement with the vendor, and the vendor will pay the money back into the reservoir. So they give us our money back, it goes back into the pool, and I spend it again. I send it out through the door to support the next trial to come along. So in this way, we have a relatively small pool of funding, but I get to spend it again and again and again. As long as only 1 or 2 trials in every 10 fails, then I can afford to absorb the loss and we can keep going with the reservoir. So this is how it works. So because the money goes out and in and out again, it's evergreen. The repaid loans are recycled into more trials. Because there is a requirement for the technology to be ready to use, we look at technology readiness level 8 or 9 companies, and they need to be working with utilities like yourselves or industrial water users. As I said at the beginning, it's international. You can be anywhere and they can be anywhere in the world, and it's non-profit. So We charge some cost recovery on the loan repayments. We don't charge it if it's a loss, only if it's a success. But it's a very, very small amount. It's in the sort of $6,000, $5,000 mark, which is not too difficult for the tech developers to cover. So it's not an investment fund. There's no return on investment for Isle or for the sponsors. It's not a grant, it is a loan. And if it's successful, then the technology vendor has to put the money they took out of the reservoir back in again. And there is a cost recovery. So it's not completely free to them, but it's a minimal amount on top of the amount that they borrow. So why would you take part? Well, you get pre-trial negotiation support. So we will help construct the trial and purchase agreement. We will make sure that the commitment makes sense. We can review the whole agreement if you need us to, but we don't have to. We can support you and your technology developer in designing success criteria and the KPIs for the trial, and what the post-trial results will be. If the trial is a success, then what the commitment will be. And it might be, you'll purchase 4 pieces of equipment, or you might take an annual subscription for a 1-year period, or something like that. We will administer legal documentation, and in the event that they take a loan, we'll transfer the funds to the technology developer. In the run-up to the trial and during the trial, you get the trial manager, who I described, and they will work to help design and deliver a robust, credible trial. They review it at the end, and they give you independent confirmation of whether or not the data that have been generated actually support what the vendor says about their technology. At the end of the trial, we undertake collaborative marketing along with you and the technology developer. You have complete control over the message about the trial that takes place within your company. So that means we can't say anything that you don't want to disclose. We won't get you into trouble with a regulator, or if the name of a site is sensitive, for example, you can keep that private. The nice thing about it is it positions the utility or the technology user as somebody who's had some vision and taken concrete steps towards net zero carbon. So it positions the end user as a leader in the industry. We have our own channels, one of which is the Water Action Platform that Valerie was talking about. We have a World Water Innovation Forum, and we have a Utility CEO Forum that we invite you to give a presentation to electronically like this. It's a webinar. And through those channels, we reach, I need to update my slide, 7,000 people in 110 countries, and they get to see what you did and how it worked. There are other opportunities. There are things like innovation hubs and things that we do at conferences, but they come at a cost, whereas everything included in the Trial Reservoir is free. So it gives a lot of positive public relations, and it spreads knowledge of the vendor and the users' activities and the success stories, I guess. We like to brag about other people's successes on the Water Action Platform. When it comes to the tech vendors, they have 3 funding options. Some of them don't take a loan. They either have the money to deliver a trial, but they like to do it in the reservoir because of all the support that they can achieve and they can obtain. Sometimes when they don't have enough money and we don't have enough money, we syndicate it to the sponsors. So that's when we approach companies like Pure Terra or Inheritance and find out whether they would fund the trial directly. But most commonly, it's a blend that includes taking a loan. And that's when we take some money out of our pot and we lend it to the technology developer so that you don't have to pay anything for the trial. The admin is very light. There are only 3 agreements. These 2, the engagement letter and the loan agreement, are just between Isle and the technology developer, and they have nothing to do with the utility at all. The only one that involves the user is the trial and purchase agreement, or the conditional purchase agreement. And this was what I described as the document that you sign between you and your supplier to say what you'll trial, what the criteria are for success, and what you will buy or what will you subscribe to if the trial is a success. If the trial is not a success, according to everybody's mutual agreement, then the and purchase part falls away and you don't have to buy anything. This is not an annual call for proposals, so the application process is open all the time. As soon as you've identified a likely technology, there's 6 questions that need to be answered, or just reach out to me and we can have a chat and talk through the questions. You don't have to use the form. It's only a 5-minute form though. If it takes more than 5 minutes, then you're thinking too hard or you're writing too much. It's a very small, I'm not interested in lots of admin. I don't want big, long proposals to have to wade through. If it's something that looks like it's going to go ahead, then there's a second form that we ask the technology vendor to fill in. So you don't have to do it, but so that you know what they're asked to provide, they have to tell us the technology name, the rationale for the trial, so what it's for, what it will serve you to do, the specific aim, the deliverable, so what they're going to report to you and when, the experimental design so that we can review it and make sure that they're conducting a robust trial, and then the financial resources they need, how much money they want to borrow or what the size of the trial is in financial terms, and how much of that they want a loan to cover. And these are the steps that we go through. So we start with an expression of interest, which is when you find something you want to do. The initial screening questions, which was the 6 questions that I spoke about. The vendor does the trader statement. They then sign the letter of engagement with us. We then all work together to sort out where you will undertake the trial, what the success criteria are, all those kinds of things. And that's by mutual agreement. So you have to be happy with them before we go ahead. Then we have the trial and purchase agreement, or the loan agreement is signed, and then the trial takes place. And the journey looks like this for you. So you would engage the end user. We will help you select which of the 5 reservoirs your trial will fall into. We can go through the initial screening questions. We then usually have an introductory call, which is you and us and the technology developer all together to sort out who's doing what. The engagement letter between us and them is signed, and then they do their trader statement. And then we do some due diligence. So we will investigate the technology and the technology company, and we will share the results with you. So if we find that they are not very reliable, or they don't provide good service, they're not commercially sound and they might disappear, or the technology isn't reliable, we will let you know. So you don't have to proceed with a trial if we don't think it's a particularly good technology to be used. We then go through the trial and KPI design. We draft the agreements. We send them the money. We go through the trial delivery and monitoring process. We provide the independent assessment at the end. Then, assuming it's a success, they repay the money into the pool, and we get into some post-trial marketing and communications work, which is what I spoke about earlier. On the left-hand side in the purple is what you would need to do. So you would want to identify a suitable trial site, and it would be obviously a site that has the problem that you want to solve. We will help you articulate success criteria that would trigger implementation. So what you need to find out in order to decide whether or not you would actually use the technology for real. Then you'd agree what the consequences are. So if it worked, you'd buy one. If it worked, you'd do it at these 2 sites. It will be up to you to decide what you would want to do with the technology after the trial. Once that's been agreed, you sign that single agreement with the technology vendor, and then we run the trial in accordance with best practice. And there might be some involvement there of operational staff or scientific services, analyzing samples or monitoring equipment and undertaking the trial in collaboration with the technology vendor. And these other boxes are things that everyone else has to do. So the tech vendor has to stick to the plan, sign the engagement letter, sign the loan agreement, and repay if the trial works. And we have our roles about supporting, validating, making sure the trial is robust, and then communicating it in collaboration with you afterwards. So to wrap up, I'm going to give you a bit of an update on what's been happening. These are the trials that are taking place at the moment, 2 in the Middle East and 3 in Europe. So it's very central time zones just at the moment, and that's something that I would like to change. These are the trials which are intended to take place. So 2 in the US, 1 in Brazil, 1 in the Pacific on Samoa, and then 2 in Europe, both in the UK. And these are the ones that have finished. So these are completed trials. All of them were successful apart from the one in the bottom right. So in the case of Hydrodrip and Cassini Water, this was a technology that monitored flow at water kiosks where people go to purchase water. And it turned out that the flow monitoring and billing devices weren't suitable for the kiosk operation conditions. So we wrote off that loan. Cassini Water don't use the technology. There's nothing wrong with the technology fundamentally, it's just not right for their use case, and Hydrodrip didn't have to repay their loan. But all the other ones have worked. So we've had 2 in Southern Africa, 1 in West Africa, 3 in North America, 1 Canada, 2 in the US, 2 in Europe, and 1 in Australia so far. The results of all the successful trials get shared on the Water Action platform. And this is again, the platform Valerie mentioned. The Water Action platform is also supported by sponsors, so it's free. It takes place once a month. It's between 25 and 30 minutes long. And after the broadcast, it's always available to watch on demand from the Isle website. So actually, about 400 people dialed in last month, for example. The last one was in February. Only 400 people watched it at the time, but about 6,000 or 5,500 people have watched it in total, including the number of people that watched it on YouTube and on LinkedIn. It covers a multitude of things. It's kind of like a magazine. We have short little segments, 5 minutes long or so, on different things. And if you want to find out more, then you can contact us to learn more. But the next one's tomorrow, and we're doing heat recovery from clean water reservoirs and what's happening in the Danube River catchment. We are covering... What are we covering? Carbon cycling in the deep ocean, and a great technology called Capture 6, which is a carbon sequestration technology that captures carbon into bicarbonate and then sequesters it away for about 10,000 years. So it's going to be really good. And if anybody wants the link, I can send it to them. This last slide is called Final Thoughts because it's sort of things I wasn't sure where to put. So you don't have to only use the Trial Reservoir once. Technology vendors can use it more than once. Technology users can also go through more than once. You can have more than one trial if you have more than one problem that you want to solve. We can also do comparative trials. So if you need to undertake competitive procurement, for example, and you want to try 3 technologies, and if they all work, you will select one, or if none of them work, you won't use any of them. We can formulate a trial plan through the reservoirs to enable that to happen. From the tests, we've learned that it's really important to get people in the non-technical side involved really early on. The legal people, the procurement people, the field operations, central operations. It's no good getting to the point where you think you've designed your trial and then trying to get other people to buy in. It's a little longer to begin with, but it's shorter overall to get them involved in the first place, so that the whole plan involves numerous viewpoints. And by the time you have your trial plan finalized, you already know it suits everybody. Figuring out site selection and making the site ready for a trial can be a real bottleneck. And we've had one trial in the UK, actually, that was delayed by 8 months because we couldn't get an electrician to put in a PowerPoint where the equipment needed to go. So these really small items can take a long time to resolve. The other thing is that if you have R&D or innovation exemptions for specifications for equipment to be installed, we all have to remember that the equipment, if it's installed for a trial, the intent is to leave it there if the trial works. So that means that sometimes you can't use R&D exemptions for reservoir trials if the intent is to install some equipment and then keep it if it does what you need it to do. And it doesn't get utilities or anyone else out of complying with procurement requirements in the country where you operate. This might mean that you need to involve supply chain before the trial can begin. So it's just a case of thinking about all of the different aspects before the trial starts. That brings me to the end of the deck. I know that was a boatload of information, and I went through it quite quickly, but I'm very happy to take questions now, and I'll share the deck, and I'd welcome questions afterwards as well. So I'm all yours.
Joe, how many can you support? How many trial reservoirs can you support? Because it's not an endless supply of money, I wouldn't think.
It isn't, but a lot of what I do is fundraising with potential sponsors. So we currently have in the pot about another £400,000. We go up to, I try to go up to a maximum of about £100,000 or 150,000 US dollars per trial, but that's not really a policy decision. If there's something amazing and I can find the extra money from one of the pots, then I will do that. Over the next 4 months, I expect 3 trials to finish, and if they finish successfully and the data are looking really good at the moment, then that money will go back in the pot and there will be more money to send out to new trials. So at the moment, I've probably got money for 4 or 5 new trials over the next 3 months, and then another 3 or 4 over the 3 months after that.
And could you perhaps describe one of the trials, just one that you've done that's been successful? You told us one that wasn't as successful and why, but can you, to give people on the line an idea of what type of things you've done?
Of course, yeah. In fact, let me bob back to, that slide. So we've got a range of completed trials, and you can see some of them are to do with agricultural water utilisation, some potable and some wastewater. One of my favourites actually is the e-water trial, which is, it's such elegant engineering. It's not particularly new technology, all of it, but the way they've integrated it is so clever. So they've got solar pumps to abstract groundwater from boreholes or wells. They have solar-powered treatment processes, including really old established technology like slow sand filters. They have a solar and gravity-fed distribution system. And then at the point of use, where the water is provided, they have smart taps, which the user has a little tag like this one that they touch to the tap, and it draws down the user's credit. So they have to buy the water, but the cost is about $6 per household per year. And the way that they've integrated this very high-tech Internet of Things billing and metering system with established technology for treatment is just so elegant and so beautiful. The staff that maintain the system were employed from the villages where the systems have been installed. So everybody is really local. The accountants are local, the CEO is local, everybody is in this project was in the Gambia. They have got other projects in Kenya and in Tanzania, and there it's the same. The systems are run by local businesses. So it's not a case that if something needs to be repaired or replaced, they have to go very far or import skills and equipment to do it. The trial covered 3 taps, the first 3 taps to be installed, and each tap provided about 1,500 litres of water per day. And now, because it worked and e-water services were appointed as the water service provider, so basically on a water service provision contract rather than a turnkey project or transfer of assets on a BWM contract, they were appointed as the service provider, and now they've put in a network of about 40 taps. That was about the first one that we did. It started in 2021. It ran for 6 months. And now it's 3 years on, and they've put in, or 2 years on, and they've put in 20 more taps in the system. And that's just really nice technology. There's a few. The N-Bioorganic one is a bioaugmentation technology to digest a high-strength organic industrial waste. The Vortec one is a better aerator, basically, for biological wastewater treatment. There's all sorts. Airumlu is ultra-low flush toilets, so they flush on 2 litres per flush because that was in Botswana, which is a desert, and they don't have enough water to be flushing it down the toilet. So it's any kind of technology you can think of. All of it is relevant as long as it solves a problem for the utility.
Thank you for that. That was a really excellent presentation and very thought-provoking for a lot of what we are working towards in the region with
Excellent.
respect to finding or building resilience in the water sector in the Caribbean. And very often there are projects that being considered, some of them are type GCF type projects. Some of those would fit, I guess if you're looking for, I think you mentioned one where you have the solar systems built into the distribution networks.
Yeah.
What sort of scale? Are these just very small scale in rural communities, or do you have some of these projects with sort of medium to larger type utilities?
We do. In fact, where is it? Planned, completed. Where's current? There it is. Okay, so this one, the desalinator trial that's taking place in the United Arab Emirates, this will end up being 100 megalitres a day, and it's solar-powered seawater desalination. They're currently providing water for agricultural use. A lot of the crops in UAE are grown in greenhouses or polythene tunnels. And so the water is being produced for a commercial farm. And when I say a commercial farm, it's huge. It is a massive factory farm that produces about half of the food that's consumed in Abu Dhabi. So that is a gigantic project. The size of the trial is 2.6 million US dollars. We are not lending them 2.6 million US dollars. They've funded most of it from fundraising and normal sort of seed funding and investor funding. We've given them a proportion of that as a loan. It's a $100,000 loan. And the reason they wanted to do it through the Trial Reservoir was that they get all the validation, and the user, Silal, is a public sector entity in the UAE, and they wanted the independent viewpoint from Isle to say whether or not desalinator were reporting truthfully on the water treatment results, because they are in the business of agriculture. Water treatment is not their core business, and they're not particularly well equipped to judge the data that they're being provided by Desalinator, the technology vendor. So these are big projects. The same with Cobalt Water. This is a big project with Rennes Metropole in France. It's a huge wastewater treatment works serving 150,000 population equivalent. So they're not all small systems.
Okay. So your Isle Water acts as a sort of a check consultant to do the validation.
Exactly.
And if you give clearance, then the project goes on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we don't own any technologies, let alone these technologies. We have no commercial interests in them. It puts us in the position that we can honestly say, if the technology doesn't work, we will say it doesn't work, or it doesn't work in that particular circumstance, a bit like the Hydrodrip technology. It's in nobody's interest to try to talk someone into taking up or implementing a technology that doesn't solve their problems. It doesn't do the user any good. It doesn't do us any good, and it certainly doesn't do the technology any good. So it puts us in a position where we can validate the trial from an independent viewpoint.
Yeah, I remember talking to peers about it who sort of, I mean, he's very altruistic. He really, really cares about things. I've seen him almost in tears about what's happening in different places. He really, really cares. And I said to him, well, how do you gauge a success? He says, well, if it's not, I probably won't have a job. So
Yeah,
he's
same
really
here.
put himself on the line. Yes, for this.
And this is why we've put our money into it. We have skin in the game. If we don't do it right, it will become apparent really quickly. And Piers and I will both be out of a job.
Yeah. To me, Ignatius, when I heard about this, I just thought, my God, what an incredible gift to the industry, that somebody will come along and take away all the risk from the utility. And we know that you get salespeople all the time coming to your utilities in the Caribbean trying to sell something, and with limited knowledge of, is this really the thing we should be doing? I remember going into Jamaica one time, and they'd been sold or were in the process of buying a whole bunch of meters. And we were able to say to them, just with the knowledge we had, this probably is not the best meter for your area. You might want to rethink some of this. But what Isle has put together is something that is so robust that Ezekiel, you're absolutely right. All the utility managers and, the people who look at technologies and are in project management in the utilities should be aware of this. Now, Joe can't fund everything, but I think they'd love to get their hands into a couple of projects in the Caribbean to show what can be done.
Absolutely. In down at the bottom of Africa, in South Africa, we constantly have people coming, typically from Europe, trying to sell us technologies without having a good understanding of what the working conditions are like. The climate and the harshness and the remoteness and the difficulty of even connecting to the internet. Yeah, no, I'll stop there.
We have a question from Jason Ernest, and please go ahead, Jason. Jason is Jason is the water director of the Water Resource Management Agency in St. Lucia. Go ahead, Jason.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ja. Good night, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Burgess. A quick question. On the part where you have the you have the user and you have the vendor, I just wanted to get a better understanding of the dynamics. So your organization provide the funding to the user to implement the technology from the vendor, and if it is successful, the vendor pays back the monies to you.
We provide the money to the vendor.
To the vendor.
You don't have to pay anything to anybody for the trial. We enable the vendor to give you the trial for free. So no money changes hands unless you get to the point where you decide the technology does what you need it to do and you'll go ahead and implement it. And then you have a commercial agreement, a contract with your supplier, the same way as you normally would. But that's the only agreement you need to enter into. So you don't take the loan out, you have nothing to pay back if it works. The vendor does that. We know that I worked in the public sector for well over a decade, and I know how difficult it is to accept a loan and then to make repayments if it's not through a normal banking institution. So we don't typically do any of that stuff with the utilities. We do it with the technology developers.
Okay, and if it fails?
If it fails, you don't have to buy anything and they don't have to pay the loan back.
Okay.
So
right.
We take the financial risk. If I do my job right, we would have no more than 1 in 10 trials that don't succeed. And in that way, I can recycle the money. We can afford some losses because we put some profit into the pot at the end of each financial year, and the sponsors put some into the pot each year on a rolling basis. So I can afford to lose some of the money, just not all of the money.
Okay. All right. And just out of that, just one final question. So once the trial is successful, is it the case now that the user goes into some type of agreement with the vendor? It's between the vendor and the user at that point?
You would have an agreement set up and signed before the trial begins that says what you're going to try and for how long and what will be measured and all those things. And then if it works, what you will procure.
Okay.
Those two things are included in the one agreement, but there's a stage gate at the end of the trial. Okay. So if it doesn't work, you don't buy anything. The second part of it is irrelevant, it's void, because the trial didn't succeed.
Okay, thank you very much. Provided much clarity. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions in the group? I haven't seen any new ones in the chat.
I think that, we've got 22 people online. A lot of you weren't here to hear most of the presentation. I know like some of you came in late. So please, when Ignatius sends this out, this is it's a game changer because it takes the risk away from you trying innovative technologies. So not only listen to it, but share it with your utility managers, because this is something that is no risk. You don't have to put any money out if, and if it's not successful, you don't buy anything. It is really risk-free. So please just listen to the whole presentation if you weren't here for the whole thing. and then please share it in your utilities, because it's an incredible gift that Isle is giving to the industry.
Right,
So everyone should do this all the time. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely innovative and a game changer, says by Valerie. And I'm sure it will spark quite a bit of interest, which we certainly will be sharing the recording with all of our stakeholders and key partners.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you will be hearing from a few of us in short order.
Excellent.
So thank you
Ignatius,
so much.
One thing you might take on with me is this would be a fantastic presentation to the high-level forum at the conference.
Yeah, we can discuss that outside of the forum.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So again, I think we're on time as we started. So I'd like to thank you very much, Valerie, for finding Joe for us. And we certainly were thrilled with this presentation and look forward to meeting you again. And perhaps maybe we will have another caucus with some of our managers in the near future based on the responses. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us for another CAWASA Wednesday webinar. I'm Ignatius Jean, the Executive Director at CAWASA, signing off and wishing you, I think it's a weekend for those of you who are Christians who celebrate Easter, wishing you a happy Easter with you and your families, and look forward to seeing you next week for another CAWASA Wednesday webinar. Bye. Have a good evening.
Joe.
Thank you for having me.
Right.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.